Hello! Good afternoon, sir and classmate. My name is Glyza Salazar from B.Ed 3E and I am the last reporter for this group. So today, we will discuss the Assure Instructional Design Model. So let's begin. According to Smaldino, Lothar, and Russell in 2008, the Assure model is an instructional system or guidelines that the teacher can use to develop lesson plans which integrate the use of technology and media. The Assure model places the focus on the learner and the overall outcomes of accomplishing learning objectives. This Assure model is an enriched evolution of the ADDIS general model. Although the Assure model has 6 steps which do not exactly correspond to ADDIS, which has 5, Assure also presents design phases and share with it the 2 main features. First, the initial focus on analysis and the cyclic structures. The peculiar feature of this model is that it is focused on planning and conducting instructions that incorporate media. Its main perspective is on how to integrate media, any kind of media, into instructions in a method capable of producing the desired learning outcomes. So this model, or the Assure model, developed by Robert Hreinig and Michael Molenda decades ago. The Assure model gained popularity because of its use in a popular textbooks for educators. Teachers prefer the Assure model because it is designed to be used for a few hours of instructions and for each individual students. This model does not require high complexities of delivered media, deep ID knowledge, or high revisions of designs. The main difference between an inexperienced, or what we call the new teachers, and an expert teacher is that an expert teacher can easily decide on the content, appropriate teaching strategies, and delivery medium that they will use in their teaching process. So the Assure model gives new teachers a general roadmap to follow to help them think more like expert teachers. The Assure model has 6 steps, each represented by a letter in the acronym title, with each step describing a set of tasks central to the informed selection and use of educational technology. The Assure acronym stands for these important components. First is analyze learners. Second is state objectives. Third is select methods, media, and materials. Fourth is utilize methods, media, and materials. Fifth is require learner participation, and last is evaluate and revise. So let's discuss the first step in the Assure model. To analyze the learners, you must examine the learner in detail. Like most things, without taking the time in the beginning to examine the learners, nothing you have prepared will be effective. Once you have an understanding and reasonable grasp for the learner's competence at the beginning of the instructions, the teacher can modify to assist the learner in their learning endeavors. So as part of analyzing your learners, you must identify your audience. So who is your audience? Your audience can be the students, teachers, group members, an organization, a youth group, and among many others. You must know the audience if you are to select the best medium to meet the objectives you have set. The audience can be analyzed in terms of their general characteristics, specific entry competencies, and their learning styles. So let's discuss first their general characteristic, which compose of their grade level, age, sex, mental, emotional, physical or social problems, and even their socioeconomic status. A superficial analysis of the learner's characteristic can provide helpful leads in selecting instructional methods and medias. The characteristics of the learners depend on their reading skills, ethnic or cultural subgroup, learner's apathy, and social background. So the more advanced have a sufficient base for using audio-visual or even verbal materials. If learner apathy toward the subject matter is a problem, consider using a highly stimulating instructional approach, such as a dramatic videotape or a simulation game. Learners entering a new conceptual area for the first time may need more direct, concrete kinds of experiences, such as field trips or role-playing. Remember, more advanced learners usually have a sufficient base for using the audiovisual or even verbal materials. So next will be the specific entry competencies, which compose of their prior knowledge, skills, and the attitudes about the topic. So, at the beginning, you have to assume that the learners lack the knowledge and skills, but they possess the knowledge or skills needed to learn and understand from the lesson. This assumption that learners have prerequisite knowledge or skill to begin the lesson can seldom be accepted casually in school settings. Teachers of mixed ability class routinely anticipate that some students will need remedial help before they are ready to begin a particular unit of instructions. This realization suggests that instructors must verify assumptions about entry competencies through informal and more formal means, such as testing with standardized or teacher-made tests. Entry tests are assessments, both formal and informal, that determine whether the students possess the prerequisites. So let's move on to the learning styles. In learning styles, it refers to the cluster or psychological traits that determine how an individual perceives, interacts with, and responds emotionally to learning environment. Gardner was dissatisfied with the concept of IQ and its unitary view of intelligence, so he identified 8 aspects of intelligence. First, we have the verbal linguistic, focus on the language, the logical mathematics, visual spatials, naturalist, musical or rhythmic, bodily kinesthetics, interpersonal, which focus on the ability to understand other people, and intrapersonal, which ability to understand oneself. So that's are the 8 aspects of intelligence by Howard Gardner, which includes in the learning styles of the learners. So let's proceed to the second step in ASSURE model, which is the state objectives. The stated objectives are statements describing what the learner will do as a result of instructions. In other words, objectives are the learning outcomes, that is, what will the students learn from the lessons. In order to develop proper objective, you must frame them in terms of desired behavior. What the learner will be able to accomplish after completing the instructions. The objective you use should be as specific as possible so that the learners understands what they are to accomplish. If objectives are clearly and specifically stated, both the learning and teaching will become objective-oriented. Most objectives contains 4 parts. First, we have the audience, the behavior, the conditions, and the degree. A well-stated objective starts by naming the audience of learners, or for whom the objective is intended. You need to focus on what the learner is doing, not on what the teacher is doing. Learning is most likely to take place when the learner is active in mentally processing an idea or physically practicing a skill. Second will be the behavior to be demonstrated. The heart of the objective is the verb. describing the new capability that the audience will have after instructions. This verb is most likely to communicate your intent clearly if it is stated as an observable behavior. Next would be the condition and the degree. In condition, it is on how and what circumstances and objectives is to be observed, or if such conditions are relevant. The final requirement of a well-stated objective is to indicate the standard by which acceptable performance will be judged includes what degree of accuracy or proficiency must the learner display, or whether the criteria are stated in qualitative or quantitative terms. So I will give you a basic example of an objective which includes the audience, the behavior and the condition, and last, the degree. So here is the example. At the end of the lesson, the students will be able to write clear learning objective using the ABCD method. In here, the students is the audience, the word write is the behavior, and using the ABCD model is the condition, and last, the word clear is now the degree. Aside from ABCD method, we have another way of determining a learning objective. It is the SMART method. In a SMART method, it stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So let's have first the word specific. In specific, we use clear and direct language to tell the learner exactly what he or she should learn or she should be able to do after the instructions. Next will be in measurable. In measurable, the point of setting a learning objective is to determine if the learner can meet, perform, or satisfy it. And you can only do that if the objective is something that you can measure. That means first that it must be an action that you can observe. This is where the common mistake of using the words like know or understand, which are not action that can be objectively observed. In learning objective is corrected. Don't create a learning objective that can be satisfied only by your own subjective understanding of the performance. Next will be the attainable. Your learning objective must be something your learners have a chance of completing or satisfying. They must have enough pre-existing knowledge, time, and similar resources. For example, you will not create a learning objective that asks an elementary school child to construct a rocket in an hour. It's just not achievable or attainable. Next would be, or the fourth is relevant. The objective should be something that the learner sees the value in learning. Don't teach materials that's not important or won't be used. Remember that your instructions or in classroom should matter to your learner. And lastly, the T stands for timely. Make sure your learning objective is something your learner will have to use in a timely fashion, like tomorrow or next week instead of next year's. So that stands for SMART approach. We have the specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So using this SMART method is a great way to help you check your own work when you're creating an objectives. It keeps you focused on building a useful objectives and works as a quick and easy checklist of sorts. If you haven't used SMART in the past, try it next time you're writing objectives and see if it doesn't help you. So let's move on to the third step in the Assure model, which is select methods, media, and materials. We already tackled the first two, which is the analyze learners and state objectives. Once you know your audience and have a clear idea of what they should get out of the lesson, Then it's time to select the appropriate method for the given learning task. Select available materials, modify existing materials, or design new materials or to help you accomplish this task. At this step, the instructors should connect the audience to the objectives. But how do we connect these two? To connect the two, the teacher must determine what method to use. A systematic plan for using media demands that the media be selected systematically at first. So the selection process has two stages. Number 1, deciding on the appropriate method for the given learning task. First, it will be overly simplistic to believe that there is one method that is superior to all others or that serves all learning needs equally well. Teachers often structure assignment to allow students with different preferred learning style to pursue their individual practice through different methods. So number 2, choosing an appropriate media format and selecting, modifying, or designing the specific materials within the format. A media format is the physical form in which a message is incorporated and displayed. Media formats include, for example, the flip charts, slides, audio, film, video, and computer multimedia. So we already talked about the media format and its example. So once you decided what media format suits your objective, the next thing that you should consider is finding specific materials to convey the lessons. So in obtaining appropriate materials, it will generally involve one or of 3 alternatives. So let's have first the selecting available materials. In here, the majority of instructional materials used by teachers and trainers are off the shelf. When we say off the shelf, it is ready-made and available from school, district, or company collections or either easily accessible sources. Next will be the modifying available materials. If you cannot locate any suitable materials, you can also modify what is available. This can be both challenging and creative. The third one is designing new materials. If there is no available instructional materials, you can design a new materials. So the selecting available materials, modifying available materials, and designing new materials is the 3 alternatives in obtaining appropriate materials that you will be used in your teaching. The next step after you select your methods, media, and materials is to utilize it. The utilize methods, media, and materials step is where you develop your plan for implementing your media and materials. For each type of media or materials, the teacher selects and describes in how they are going to implement the media into your lesson to help your learners meet the lesson's objectives. The media, materials, and technology selected should be focused on carrying out the selected method. If you decide to use electronic equipment, be sure to use it before even practice if you have to ensure that the equipment is functioning properly. In the same regard, it is also important to practice the lesson itself before introducing it to the learner. Next, prepare the room, the necessary equipment and facilities. It may be obvious, but both the learner and teacher should be prepared for the learning experience. To get the maximum learning impact from your presentation, you must follow certain utilization procedure. Number 1, review the materials. No instructional materials should be used blind. That's why during the selection process, you should have determined that the materials are appropriate for your audience and objectives. Number 2, practice the presentations. After previewing the materials, you should practice your portion of the presentation. However, do not practice or the presentation will be sound canned. Number 3, prepare the environment. Wherever the presentation is to take place, even if it is in classroom, auditorium, meeting room, or whatever, the facilities will have to be put in order. Utilization of many media requires a darkened room, a convenient power supply, and access to light switches. Number 4, or the last procedure in utilization. Present the materials. This is what you've been preparing for, so you will want to make the most of it. Our term for this is showmanship. Instructors should be able to direct attention in the classroom. So that will be the utilization procedures in utilize methods, media, and materials step in the Assure model. The second to the last step on this Assure model is require learner participation. In this step, it requires you to describe how you are going to get each learner actively and individually involved in the lesson. Students learn best when they are actively involved in the learning experience. Whatever your teaching strategies, be sure to incorporate questions and answers, discussions, group work, hands-on activity, and other ways of getting students actively involved in the learning of the content. You should seek to pay close attention to your learners and feel confident that they are truly grasping the content and not just listening. So participating in the learning will facilitate this level of understanding. Allow them to construct knowledge as opposed to trying to teach them knowledge. So finally, for this step, feedback must be provided to the learner before any type of evaluation is conducted. So the fifth step in the Assure model is to provide opportunities for learners to practice the capability being taught. So educators have long realized that participation in the learning process by the learner enhances learning. So dyan do we urge reorganization of the curriculum and instruction to make students' participation a central part of the process. The last step of the Assure method or model is evaluate and revise. Here, the evaluation should be matched to the objective. Ultimately, this last stage is the most important. You must evaluate the instruction process from start to finish using the objectives you created in the beginning. It is helpful to reflect on your objectives, the instructional strategies, the instructional materials, and the assessment. By evaluating the learners against the objectives, it can be determined if the lessons was effective and whether any steps needs to be modified or re-examined. Remember this, the Assure model supports the field of educational technology. It is based on the principle that no one student acquires information in the same way. While the Assure model is used to systematically design instruction, it is steps away from the traditional means of instruction, which is using a textbook, lectures, and etc., to the use of technology to deliver the instructions. In conclusion, the Assure process is really just a matter of common sense. However, it is good to follow a guide to improve your teaching technique. Any effective teachers knows that the perfection of their technique does not come overnight, and there is always room for improvement. So by following the Assure process, you will be able to improve your teaching for many years to come. Overall, the Assure model has 6 components, each necessary for the successful implementation of the instructions, including analyze learners, state objectives, select methods, media and materials, utilize media and materials, require learner participation, and evaluate and revise. And that is all about from my report. Thank you for listening. God bless you.